Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening and watching Rashkin Report. My name is Yuri Rashkin, and I'm excited to be joined today by a violinist and a person and a man, Boris Brovtsyn, who is joining us from Vienna, Austria, if I'm not mistaken. Am I correct? You're in Vienna?
That's right. Last time I checked.
The first place I was in after I left Soviet Union was Vienna, and the memories of that
You went
place are
down
just
that route. You went through
I
that.
did. I did. It's
Okay.
just magical. Just like after Soviet Union, you see Vienna and you go, "Oh my gosh, this is possible. It's
I
incredible."
know. I
You
know.
you love it?
Well, I mean, by now we are sort of desensitized to all the wonders the West has to offer, but it's still, it still has its magic. It's a
Yeah.
it's a very compact city, as you may remember.
It
It's
is.
it's
I kind of
probably the smallest of the big cities in the world, I would say.
okay.
Took me
Yeah.
took me a week to get to know it. Uh, as for comparison, I spent probably close to 16 years in London, and I still didn't know the city. I mean, to this day, I can get lost in London easily. Vienna, not so much. Everything's clear, everything works, and the infrastructure's great. No reason to
Does it
complain.
does it say anything about Austrian character versus English character, or that's just how things
I mean,
developed?
it's hard not to resort to stereotypes
Right.
but one would expect a certain level of coherence from the English as well. And London is just such a mess. London is, I mean, it doesn't really have a center, and it keeps growing. I remember when I first moved there, it's divided into zones. Like anything beyond zone 3 was really looked down upon. Like, that's where you live. People used to be very dismissive of that. Now zone 6, which was considered to be middle of nowhere, that is considered to be a desirable area to reside in. And I just
So which zone were you in?
I was just on the boundaries of zone 3 and 4. I was sort of not quite in the ghetto, but close to it. And now it's complete. I mean, the area I used to live in is now completely gentrified.
That's every city has this kind of a growth idea. In Chicago it's known as Chicagoland. In San Francisco it becomes Bay Area. It kind of grows, and I guess in London it's limited by water as well, relatively speaking. All right, Boris, I should mention your biography because I think it's important. So, Boris Brovtsyn is a Russian violinist and teacher born in Moscow in 1977. He is known for his amazing technique and the use of rubato.
Who writes this?
Right? Who wrote this? This is from the Prone to Violence blog. I thought this is interesting because it's not your website, which means somebody who really is impressed by you, who wrote this. So you decide how well famous you are for your rubato. In the style of many virtuoso violinists of another generation, violinists such as Misha Elman, Fritz Kreisler, Jacques Thibault, Ida Handel, Nathan Milstein, and
I had nothing to do with this. All these
fascinating. All right, this is like those videos where you watch your. Yeah, go ahead.
Very inappropriate, I must say.
Okay.
I mean, I'm of course. I'm beyond flattered, but I would never in my life put myself in that company.
Wow. Okay. See, because I'm reading names that I don't even recognize myself, and you are going, "Oh my gosh, I'm not that good."
Like who?
Well, I know that. Yes, Ida Handel, not Nathan Milstein, Ivry Gitless. I am ignorant. I am an ignoramus.
Ivry passed away. Ivry was a dear friend of mine. He passed away on last Christmas Day. Ivry was actually born in Haifa in 1922, so you can imagine. The guy knew everybody. He I mean, he showed actually his birth certificate, which said British Mandate Palestine on it.
Wow.
Yeah, and
so you've heard him play, you know what he's capable of, and you go, "That's not me." Or
no, he was an absolute marvel. But I mean, the two names on that list, I
Ida
met
Handel, Nathan
him,
Milstein.
and I took some lessons of Ida, and you couldn't find more different personalities if you tried. Ivry was a complete maverick, true force of nature, sort of. I played chamber music with him on a couple of occasions, and I mean, everyone has an Ivry story, you know, in
What
our
was
circle.
yours?
Oh, I mean, where do I begin? His apartment in Paris. I've never seen a bigger mess in my life. It was just complete chaos. It was complete chaos. Imagine the worst mess you've ever seen. I mean, it took me a while to realize where the fridge was, because the fridge was just completely covered in newspaper clippings. It was just completely covered. And he had rats in the apartment.
Was he a
that he
hoarder?
had to, what?
Was he a hoarder, or is it just a mess, or he didn't clean things up, or
I think he was not big on tidying up. Sort of, you know, if
that was not
thing
his
was left
existence?
somewhere, that's where it would stay. You know, yeah, he literally had rats in the apartment, and he would like throw his slippers at them and curse at them. But kind of he accepted that he needed to coexist with them. Like there was
It
no
sounds like a
getting rid of
family
them.
life, family life, when you're like with a spouse, like you accept that they're there.
He was
And
not. I mean, he had kids from different women. Obviously, you can imagine that a man like that would not be easy to pin down. He also, I know he had like problematic relationships with all of them for different reasons, and I mean, where do I begin? Huge character, and the sort of people
but
that
but
went.
what I'm curious is, how does that then translate into his music? How did that come out in his
Oh,
music?
you can hear that. It's an improvisation. The guy, I mean, he should have, on one hand, he should have had a bigger career. On the other hand, everyone in the classical music world knows who he is, or was rather. He, I mean, one thing you can check out, there is this bizarre Rolling Stones concert from the I suppose early 70s or something like that. I think it was just after the Beatles disbanded, and he's just on stage jamming with John Lennon and Yoko. No, I'm not making this up.
I'm just trying to imagine all of this. I have to go to YouTube now and find. We'll have to put
yeah. I mean,
video in the
if
description
you
to
type
this
in
video, right?
immediately John Lennon, I'm sure that bizarre video will come up. And Yoko is doing her thing. She's just doing this. What she always did. Just
Yeah, her
this
musical
screeching.
talents was not a
Yeah. So that's Ivry basically. Ida was probably the most serious person I've ever met. I mean, I doubt she also passed away maybe a couple of years ago, and nobody really knew her real age. Apparently, she used to be like 25 for 30 years, something like that. She was tiny, always wore huge heels and enormous wigs, like just to really add to the height. And she was still tiny, even with the heels and the wigs. And
maybe she would have been so much smaller without those.
True, but she was this tiny, terrifying person. Like with she had a stare to her, really terrifying glare somehow, and it's like she was really displeased with you all the time. But she was, I must say, she was very complimentary towards my playing. She spoke Russian to me, which I mean, she was born in Poland, in that area which, you know, changed hands so many times during the war, you know, the world wars, somewhere on the border of something. But I think she was. I'm pretty sure she was born in what was then Poland and probably remained Poland. I don't know. She spoke a very sort of correct Russian. I was really curious how she, where did she learn it from? And but it was a complete, rabbit in the headlights moment for me. She did not have her violin with her during the lessons, but she would occasionally take mine. And at those moments, I would think to myself, wow, my violin can actually sound good. You know, no, she had.
It's too early to sell this thing.
I mean, I don't have that violin anymore, but still, she made it sound like a completely different person. And she had this sort of old-fashioned bow hold when, you know, you hold your bow sort of a bit like this. I mean, people don't really do that anymore these days.
But it's not comfortable, because I mean, you know, like this.
It has its advantages. I mean, Heifetz has a similar bow hold, and so does Milstein and lots of other people. It's a sort of technique that you don't really see anymore. And it was amazing.
Why not? If this is such superstars that are doing it, why not?
I think of it like I mean, what sports do you follow? Do you follow boxing at all?
Hardly.
Right.
But you know, okay. But I was thinking, like, I'm a bass player as well, because when I failed at violin, they told me that I can be either a percussionist or a bass player, and I really love bass. And
right.
And then they had French and German way of holding the bow as well.
Yeah. It's this. Yeah.
Is there any sort of a comparison there?
I would say the difference is not as stark, obviously. But I mean, if to go back to my sort of boxing comparison, if you watch old videos of people like Jack Johnson and all those, you know,
like black and white kind of boxing.
It is really a different sport. Kind of the output is not as intense as nowadays, but they had to, you know, you have to remember that those guys, sometimes they had to go 30 rounds, 50 rounds. People don't do that anymore. Now 12 rounds is the championship length of a fight. It doesn't go longer than this. So people now fight more intensely. But back then, you had to conserve energy. But then again, you can see people loading up on each punch a lot more. Sort of, you put everything in this punch. If it misses, you reset, you go back. And I mean, this hold, the entire weight of your arm goes. It's a sort of like putting all of your eggs in one basket, kind of thing. It gives you a lot of power, but it doesn't give you a lot of versatility. That's why sometimes you can hear even Heifetz, who is, for me, the best violinist of all time, still. If you listen to some of his recordings, you can hear how some of his chords are quite harsh, because there is basically no shock absorption, which this sort of this bow hold gives you. I mean, it's all boring stuff.
Is it also a matter of acoustics that you want to make it louder? You're going to be playing it louder this way? And with microphones, you don't need to do that.
What people used to do kind of gave a much more consistent intensity to what they were doing. Yeah. Again, it's everything in life. I
It's
think
really mechanicals of how the sound transfers from
true,
fingers to out and all of
but
that kind
it's
of stuff.
also, I mean, it's a trade-off in a way, and you see that also it is weirdly enough, it's reflected in how, it's not just my opinion, it's a lot how nowadays the sort of the music scene looks like. I think it cannot be questioned, I think, that the general level of playing nowadays is much higher than it used to be. Like the average player, average conservatory player these days is much better. But the outliers, the absolute peaks of playing are not as amazing as they used to be. Probably because there are no more, let's say, there are no more national schools anymore. The information is very evenly spread. There is, I don't think anything will, any revolutionary knowledge will come along as to how a sound is produced, how a bow change is made, how to achieve articulation, how this is done or how that is done. I think by now most of the things are open secrets. But the downside to that is, of course, that people don't really explore things for themselves anymore, because there is so much information out there that the original things sometimes they come about because people are really looking for their own solution, and sometimes they can come up with something really original, and that's not the case.
Okay, the thing then I want to ask you is it kind of was an interesting point for me, is how many Christmas albums are sold every year, considering that the songs are the same,
Right.
but it's the performer that you want to hear how your favorite performer does these favorite songs. So on that level, you're working with an instrument that's mature instrument that's, well, not just your individual instrument, but violin in general. It's been around for a few hundred years in its consistent form. Maybe it's just is the interesting features of particular performer just kind of where it's at versus developing the possibilities of the instrument?
I think there are different sides to the, I mean, it's a really dirty word, market. There are different sides.
Market. Okay.
Yeah. Look, I know what I personally pursue doing this. I mean, I'm just still genuinely interested in what people used to write. I still think there are things to discover because I mean I think every era makes its kind of stamp on the people who happen to be performing, right there and then. I mean, a lot of the I mean, I love the old school. I absolutely adore. That's why I don't want to be even mentioned in that, what you said at the beginning, that list of people. But also, I must say, I know that this might sound arrogant or like I'm some kind of know-it-all, but a lot of the things they used to do, I don't want to say discredited, but a lot of what they used to do did not age so well, And for instance, the Heifetz recorded the complete cycle of sonatas and partitas by Bach. It's hard to listen to what he does. It's really hard to listen what he does because he basically applies the same formulas that work for him in Wieniawski or any of those authors, or Saint-Saëns or Sarasate. Heifetz is really great when you give him a second-rate piece and he makes it sound like this is the best music ever written. Or some, some expressionist stuff. I mean, no one really plays like like that. It's impossible. But when it gets to Bach, it really, he paints it with basically the same brush, and some of it is, I'm willing even to say that some of it is interesting because he has such phenomenal kind of inner sense of structure, and he makes you listen to him, but at times you just wish, he didn't do, you wish he wouldn't do the things that he is doing. So there is that, I think.
Boris, I would love to like dig further into this right now, but I understand that we have a somewhat time factor, and you said that you'd be willing to play for us. So do we want to continue with the conversation, or do we want to take a break to make some noise?
Yes, we could do that, sure.
Or do we want to continue with, just your time requirements?
No, not at all. I mean, I'm not short of time. I don't know if you've noticed, but there is a pandemic going on. And
yes, but you have a small child who, I don't know how a child feels about violin, probably pretty well, considering is it a fifth generation musician would be in your family? Sixth? How many generations?
Well, yeah, probably fifth. I'm fourth, yeah.
Right. Does this child have a choice?
I'm very pro-choice.
Can it play like violin or viola, or is it just violin?
He's quite big for his age. He's 19 months now.
And so he's almost ready for Carnegie Hall.
He is almost ready to play viola, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
I think if he does play an instrument, it's going to be either viola or double bass.
Is it for like a duet, or just because he's big for his age? He's big for his size, therefore.
I think he's got the size.
You're a professional. I can't realize to what extent. It's a pleasure.
No. I think he's got a size for it.
Because when I was like a little kid and I came to be tested for the music school, they looked at my fingers like I was like a horse. Like they look at your teeth and they look like, oh yeah, he'll be fine for violin. Like, okay, you're doing the same thing with the child. You're looking and saying you would be good for double bass or viola.
I think that approach is very
common sense.
It is a very dated approach. I mean, the physical constraints, I know they exist, but violin playing, I think, is by its nature such a, sorry for the tautology, but by its nature is a very unnatural thing to do. I mean, the posture like this, to be in this position all the time. I mean, where else in life do we do this? Like in Greek tragedy, perhaps, we do, but otherwise this posture
is... Tonight's specials are...
Yeah, exactly. Okay, but how long are you planning to present to be presenting the specials? This is just a very unnatural occupation. The original method of playing the violin was kind of against the body, resting it against the body and just doing this. I
did not know that. All right, okay.
Yeah, that's you can still see some Irish folk fiddlers playing like that. It's more common than you think.
But you're a violinist. You're not a fiddler, which apparently are two totally different things.
They are totally different things, and I envy fiddlers with a passion, actually, because I love that sort of stuff, but I think it's way too late for me to reprogram my brain. And
you have to reprogram your brain to be
I'm pretty sure. It's always been passion, but unfortunately, this is something that I need to watch. I have to watch from afar. My dear friend Denis Matsuev, who you must know, the pianist.
Okay. Yes.
He is one of these rare examples of people who can brilliantly do both. I mean, he probably a good 10-15% of courses that he does are jazz. He's got a jazz trio. And as far as I can tell, he's brilliant at that. On the violin, it's much rarer. In all of my life, I've met really just a handful of people who can legitimately improvise. I think violin is just not suited so well for improvisation.
I mean, there's gypsy jazz, there's Crapelli, there's
There
few
is, yes,
people.
I love gypsy jazz, sure. But it's just because there are no keys that you hit. I think it's such a particular gift that one must have. And I don't think it's something that, even if I tried, I don't think I have it in me, because I really think in terms of notes and not something between the notes, you know?
All right. But just out of curiosity, do you play other instruments?
I started out as a pianist.
Do you do jazz on piano? There are definite keys.
No, I mean, I've learned other people's improvisations. I had a book of just, Peterson's transcriptions written out, and I fooled around with that a little bit. But it's just, of course, it's just for my own. I wouldn't even call it amusement. It's just something to get out of my system,
All right. No,
But of course,
great.
who wants to do that when you can listen to the real thing?
Well, you do what you do, and you do it so well, and first, I just saw this video of you playing a Bach toccata and fugue in D minor, which was just, it really caught my attention, because on social media, so many videos just fly by. And of course, the person who wrote the text underneath was talking about how she was amazed. That's always, buys you a few seconds of attention.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I just think that you really, and I have no idea what you're going to do precisely, but I was, and then listening to you play in other contexts and other videos, you're like a kind of a strong worded musician, not necessarily aggressive, but you're definite. You know what you're trying to say. You're saying it very clearly, very articulately. And it's interesting to hear and listen to you the same way that I would enjoy listening to a good orator. Because I teach public speaking these days. So when I
Right.
hear somebody who is a good speaker, I go, that's just enjoyable for the technique of it. And
Oh
you're
yeah.
just outstanding. And I really, really enjoyed listening to you.
Oh, that's very kind. But that concert that I played just the other week, the video which you saw, as you can imagine, concert life is practically non-existent now. And last time, before that concert, the last time I went on stage was in November. It was supposed to be a series of 3 concerts in Switzerland, which eventually just got cut down to a single broadcast. I've not been in front of a live audience since August, really, and that's a huge
It's
gap.
almost the longest you've been not in front of audience since birth.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, since the moment I picked up the fiddle, really, because there's nothing that can substitute stage time, in a way, and you just get rusty.
Do
There's
you
no
get
way.
nervous? I have a lot of students who get really nervous. Do you get
I was
nervous?
more nervous than usual, I would say. The repertoire sort of helped, because what you saw was more of a curiosity. The concert itself was 3 sonatas by Bach. That's very serious music, and the way because that arrangement of the toccata and fugue that I played was sort of my thank you to the people who sat through more than an hour of pretty serious, heavy stuff. But I think to go back to live performing after such a long gap, I think that repertoire in a way was perfect, because Bach, Bach is probably my favorite thing in the world, but he's got this sort of the personified quality to it. I don't know how else to put it. It's, if you get to know it, you feel that it's not really about you, his music. That's why I think it aged also so well. He never allows himself to be personal. There's something wonderfully stoic and puritanic, I think, in his music, while it's very passionate, but at the same time, it's never sort of like an open wound, like all conflicts are not just resolvable, but already resolved. So I think it kind of really puts
like
you
a big cosmic sense.
Oh, it's completely
like in a big cosmic sense, these conflicts have already been resolved.
I think so. I think he's just his music is a very complicated way of saying everything will be all right at the end. I mean, to give you just one example, not really an example, but just something to think about. I mean, he knew opera existed.
He knew what?
That opera as a genre.
Oh, okay, yes, opera. Okay.
Opera existed, but he never ever tried to write an opera. I mean, the closest he comes to writing an opera is in some of his cantatas profanes, his secular cantatas. The most famous of them being the so-called coffee cantata, where there is a little bit of a story. Like, the father is not happy that the daughter took a liking to coffee, which was, a novelty at the time. And she is kind of trying to convince him that it only does her good, and there is no downside to coffee. But that's pretty much as close as he gets to writing an opera. What I'm trying to say is that he had really no time for all these operatic emotions, love, betrayal, stabbing in the back, all running off into the night in disguise, all of that, all of which we get so much, with Mozart, for instance. Yeah. It's just a bunch of characters in, funny situations or whatnot. He's really not into that.
Conveys those emotions. Music that conveys those emotions. That's what Mozart does so incredibly well. But Bach kind of takes the emotions out of it a little bit. But yet then you put them back in. Thanks a lot.
Right. But in our circle, when the pandemic hit, it was sort of like a running joke that once this is over, there will be lots of people recording solo Bach on the violin, because what else is there to do? Like you don't play with orchestras no more. You cannot even play recitals. So you're a violinist on your own. Our options are limited. I mean, all we have is Bach sonatas and partitas, Paganini 24 caprices, and I do play those, but that's more of a young man's game. And 6 sonatas by Eugène Ysaÿe, this Belgian composer, and I've already recorded that, so I have that T-shirt, so to speak. So yeah, I mean, it felt like a natural thing to do to divert all of my attention into Bach. And the only problem was to find a venue, and lo and behold, Moscow is still open.
That's what I hear.
Yeah, I was completely.
How does that feel? Because you're right, because you live in a place that I'm sure is locked down quite extensively, and then
our lockdown is not the strictest. It's not the strictest. I mean, just yesterday, me and my wife and I, and we took our kid to Schönbrunn, and it was packed, and hardly a mask inside. But yes, shops definitely, people are being very sensible about it. Of course, this is, I'm not going to say it's German because the Austrians will never forgive me for saying that, but it's sort of this, or Ordnung mentality. Ordnung muss sein, as they say.
Is it working?
I mean, I'm afraid to even go research these things on the internet, because you know how internet works. Like, you ask Google a question and usually the craziest things come up first. And I hope it is working, of course. I mean, I have no wish for it to continue. I think it went for much longer than, I mean, think a year ago, who could have predicted this, that it will go on for so long?
And here we are. All right.
Yeah.
Then before I continue reading your bio written by somebody else, and you can tell me how incorrect and how way too kind it is, would you care to play for us a little bit of Bach?
Yes, I mean, we're limited by the venue I'm in, which is, this is the room where I do most of my practicing, and so I picked it for its poor acoustics. And besides, as we've already figured out during that little sound check that we did, that it's better for me not to play too loud. But fortunately enough, there are some movements in that in the sonatas and partitas cycle which I think would fit the bill nicely. Just as a little introduction, the biblical imagery in Bach's music is quite strong, and there are different schools of thought as to what signifies what. There are some things which are more or less easy to decipher, like the motive of the cross that he uses so often for his fugues sometimes, or his own surname, which he encodes, B-A-C-H, that he encodes in some of his works, which centuries later, our compatriot Dmitry Shostakovich would start doing in his music. But what makes the cycle of sonatas and partitas that he wrote for the violin particularly interesting is that so it's 6 works, 3 sonatas and 3 partitas, and there is a movement there. One of the most famous pieces that he wrote, the Chaconne, which really kind of stands out as a piece on its own. And there is a school of thought, I think, it may have originated with Albert Schweitzer. I've not done my research properly, but I like this interpretation, is that it's the entire cycle, even though it's 6 pieces, it's actually a full week. That's why Chaconne is actually the Friday. So it's the Passions Week. So the Friday is the day of the crucifixion. So after the Chaconne comes sonata number 3, which is the 5th piece in the cycle. It goes sonata partita, sonata partita. So the third sonata is the 5th piece in the cycle. And there is a movement in there which comes after a very long fugue, which the fugue is based on a chorale called Veni Sanctus Spiritus, Come the Holy Ghost. Yeah. And it's probably supposed to signify the women who went to the tomb on Saturday to find it empty. It's not sad, but it's kind of contemplative. It's probably one of my most famous, my most dear pieces in the cycle. I mean, I will not do it justice, but then again, no one will. So here I am. There we go. So
Thank you
where
so
were
much.
we? Pleasure.
Right. Well, Bach, and I will. Yeah, I guess everything will be all right. You're right. Bach was correct. All right. Let me jump to this. So, my guest, Boris Brovtsyn, began playing the violin at age 4. At age 6, he made his public debut at the famous Bolshoi Theater. His grandfather, a pupil of the famous pedagogue Abram Yemporsky, teacher of Leonid Kogan, was his first teacher. At age 7 in 1984, Brovtsyn entered the Central Music School in Moscow and graduated 10 years later. Why not Gnesin? Was you teacher teaching at the Moscow Central School? Is that why you went there?
Okay, now you're just
Two
being
schools.
tribal.
All
You're
right,
being
you're right.
tribal.
I am. Thank you for acknowledging. I belong to that tribe. All right.
Yes.
Okay. Then he entered Tchaikovsky Moscow Conservatory, where he studied with Maya Glizarova. From there, he graduated in 99. He had already made his US debut in 95 and his UK debut in 98. He had already played for the Pope in 93. He studied further at the Guildhall School of Music in London, where he won the gold medal in 2004. His main teacher there was David Takeno. His career has taken him to places all over the world, but especially Europe. As do practically all concert violinists, he plays at music festivals all over the world. Brovtsyn plays in 1862 Viom violin.
No longer. That's actually old info.
All right.
So that fiddle is gone. That was actually the violin that Ida Handel made sound well. I never really liked that violin, but it was sort of a family treasure. Used to belong to my great grandfather. He bought it in probably sometime in the late 30s.
Is a violin much more expensive because of who played it?
I mean, provenance is very important. At the top of, violin for a violin dealer, provenance is a good chunk of the price. I mean, most of the great violins nowadays, they sort of have names as to, as in X such and such, even if it's not the name of a famous player, it's usually a name of a famous owner, because truth be told, the ones that are the better preserved, and actually the condition of the instrument matters a great deal also. Those were the violins that were never played by serious players and spent a lot of time just gathering dust in private collections. That's why
it doesn't make an instrument any worse or better if it's been played.
What makes an instrument worse is the inevitable wear and tear, and I'm mostly talking about accidents that unfortunately do happen, and then cracks appear. And there are some places on the violin where a crack doesn't make that much of a difference, but again, there are some kind of danger zones where a crack can take off half of the price. And that's what we have to live with.
All right. Now
carrying our violins around.
Right. So what is your new instrument then?
Well, it's actually a funny thing that I came across by accident while my then violin, which is mentioned in that blogger bio, was being repaired. Not repaired, but serviced. Repair is a big thing. Service is just basically
every 100,000 notes you do a maintenance on the violin.
One has to. I mean, you have to. There is usually a buildup of excess rosin here, which one can, of course, clean up themselves. But it's better to let a professional do it. There is dust gathering inside. I mean, I have a dust bowl living in my violin, which I refuse to remove because I got used to it, and I know it's there. It's kind of it's more of a good luck charm at this point. And I specifically, when I have my fiddle serviced, I tell, please don't take out the dust bowl. I don't think it affects the sound. But yes, I mean, sometimes I mean, there's some little things.
But while one was in maintenance, you found another one.
Yes, just there was a bunch of violins lying around at my dealer's place, which were also, my dealer in London. He had this sounds like a drug operation. I'm sorry, my
It
violin
really does, but it's only because so few people deal with violin dealers.
Yeah. So he had also the part of the house was the workshop where the work was being carried out. And he had a bunch of violins just lying around. Some of them were, quite pricey. Of course, the Stradivarius and the Jesus, they're kept in the safe. But he had good, let's say the Ferraris were in the garage, but the Lexuses and, that sort of thing was out in the open. And I started just trying them out because I was bored. And this one really stood out. And it has no label. It had no label. So I asked what it was, because I mean, I know my way around violins, but sometimes I just cannot tell what a violin is, well, what the maker is. And they told me what it was. I inquired about the price, and it was basically peanuts, So I bought it straight away. It's actually, it's not an Italian violin. It's a German violin, but it comes from a very, actually, kind of tragic period in German violin making, which is just between the two world wars, where there used to be a very strong school, which might have went on to make great things, if not for the war. And it is really kind of exceptional example from that period. And I know, I mean, people use hyperbole more often than they should, but allow me to have a stab at it. I mean, I honestly would not sell it for, I don't know. I don't think there is an amount of money that I would sell. Of course, I mean, there are some ridiculous amount of money that can buy.
I mean, if somebody pulled up a truck full of money to your car, to your house.
Yeah. But because over the years, I've had a chance to compare it with things that go for well over $1 million. And
that's a good way to look at it. You would compare it favorably to violins that would go for $1 million.
Oh yeah, more than favorably. I mean, $1 million is like a conservative estimate. Really.
I presume you have a good insurance policy on this instrument, but how can you use words to describe the sound? And how it is different, or how it works for you?
What I like about it is that it's clear. It has a certain clarity about it, which sometimes what I don't like sometimes about violins is when the sound is mushy, when it sounds a little bit like a radio station which is not quite in focus. There is this kind of background noise. Basically, the sound is not focused. The sound is not focused, and that means that is more like a shotgun shot that sounds loud up close, but it probably will not travel far.
Oh, okay.
But the opposite end of the spectrum is that the violin can sometimes sound nasal. Not this violin, but sometimes that's the opposite end of that spectrum of sound. When the sound is too much like a mosquito, like it's too much zzz. But there is
That's
this,
been mostly the experience of my childhood for some reason, but that's my
yeah,
PTSD is that
yeah, right. I hear you.
right.
We've been there. Yeah.
If you could talk a little bit about, actually, I guess I would be curious to know, really, your growing up experience. You are just about a violin royalty in Russia, considering your grandparents and those kinds of things. So did you play violin then 24 hours, 12 hours a day? I mean, you got to sleep sometime, but
No, no. I mean, this biography is really a good example of how a bumpy road can be described as something fairly straightforward. Uh, I look. I mean, it says that I entered the music school and graduated 10 years later. There was stuff in between, you know. Like I didn't play for a year, and I had to kind of claw my way back into music, largely against my will, due to some family circumstances, you know, parents splitting up, and then kind of what I had in my childhood had to be painstakingly rebuilt. And I only returned to the Central Music School when I was in my mid-teens. I think I was 14 when I returned, and then actually my years at the Moscow Conservatory were also not smooth sailing because my mother emigrated. She was the first to leave Russia, and kind of I also had to go somewhere. So I spent 3 semesters in the States, in Texas of all places. So I actually I got to know, you know, this Texas for some reason. That knowledge, it's sort of, I'm still ambivalent about it. You know, that experience. Is it something I wish I didn't know about humanity, or is that you know, is that useful? Like, but it did give me, you
did
know,
it
some.
cost you a lot? Did you lose time while you were in Texas?
I lost some time. I gained some knowledge about humanity, I would say. Like I almost got shot by the police at one point. That's why I kind of, I mean,
It was not for your playing violin, though, I bet.
no, no, no. I mean, they had sufficient grounds for that, but no, it was just you know, wrong place, wrong time kind of thing. Also, I mean, what saved my life was that I was with a girl, and she kind of managed to explain to them that I was a recent arrival. Because when they asked for an ID, I started rummaging through my pockets. And you know,
You
you're
made
not
them
supposed.
nervous.
You're not supposed to do that. And so they take out their magnums or whatever, and you know, because the guns down south are big, or at least they're big in my memory. And of course that made me rummage even more, you know, panicky, you know. But anyway,
So
that was,
Texas happened, and so there were some challenges along the way. You didn't just sail
there was some,
smooth
yeah,
sailing.
yeah, no,
Is it
smooth
because you're a
sailing this one.
troublemaker? Are you a troublemaker? Like,
I'm a trouble observer. Um, I mean, I love a good ruckus, but I don't instigate. But I'll lend a hand if needed.
all right, very supportive for Ruckus.
Yeah.
Well, I guess out of curiosity, do you ever look toward east, towards Russia, and then look what's going on there? And do you just say, "Well, thank God I'm in Vienna," or do you feel like I don't know that anybody feels like they can do anything, except for Navalny, and look at how well he's doing. But nonetheless, there's this feeling of protest and there's a feeling of dissatisfaction. Do you, as a musician, pay attention to those things, or do you feel that this is not something that's
I
important to you at all?
No, it occupies a lot of my thoughts, and more than it should, really, considering that there's very little one can do from here to influence the situation in any way. I mean, there are two scenarios. Either it somehow implodes from within, which somehow doesn't seem likely from what I'm hearing on my rare visits to Moscow. But then again, Moscow is not really Russia. It's sort of it's like an enclave, you know. It's a city state in a way. You go outside, you drive for half an hour. It's a completely different country. But what I will say in defense of the Russians, I mean, Mr. Goebbels has nothing on the people who are running the propaganda machine there now. Like, if you even watch state-controlled channels for half a minute, you will get sucked in somehow. It is really masterfully done, the way people are being propagandized, you know, and manipulated and fed this steady stream of bullshit. And it's very, even, you know, it's just hard to resist somehow. I consider myself to be a fairly skeptical person about this stuff, but even then, you know, I even treated myself as sort of a guinea pig while I'm there on some occasions, and I just watched TV for what is called the first channel, you know, Первый канал, for sort of close to an hour a day. And I remember just coming away from it thinking, maybe things are really not as they seem, you know. Maybe Putin is trying to do the right thing, and which is, of course, not true. I mean, he's evil personified, and he's probably the richest person in the world right now. So
I think so too, but we'll know afterwards for sure.
Yeah, either it implodes from within, or what seems more likely, that China will take over, which is not necessarily a good thing. I mean, it probably will annex a good chunk of the country. I mean, it sounds preposterous, but I think it's a totally plausible scenario.
I think it's easier to do than it may sound.
Oh yeah. I mean, like, I've been to Irkutsk a few times, and during my last visit, because I keep asking the locals, you know, about this thing, the Chinese tourism in the area has spiked so much. Like, there are businesses who rely almost exclusively on Chinese tourist clientele. And tourism doesn't sound too insidious, does it? But on the other hand, it's just, you know, let me just tell you a quick personal story. So I was with my friends on Lake Baikal, which, as we know, is the largest freshwater reservoir on Earth. It's a very desirable strategic thing to have in your country, if you know what to do with it. And I saw, we were in a sort of, we hired a boat. I make it sound so oligarch, but it's fine. That's what people do over there. And we were in like a little remote corner on the other side from the city, you know. And I saw a group of Chinese tourists holding some sort of banner, very long banner. There was maybe 30 of them, all holding that long banner. And I was curious what it was. What did it say? Not that I can read Chinese, but I have people in my life who can translate it. So I kind of clandestinely, you know, tried to take some pictures. Once they saw me, you won't believe, it was like a harmonica being let go. They just went like this with the banner. To this day, I mean, I'm curious as to what the banner was, you know, saying. but probably something to the effect that, one day this will all be ours. That would be my guess. I know this sounds conspiratorial, but they look pretty conspiratorial to me, those people. And I have it on good authority that they have maps in China, which I know I sound like a crackpot now, but they have maps in China which include large areas of Siberia. And not just that, a friend of mine was just maybe a month or two ago was playing concerts in Khabarovsk, which is, east on the border with China. And from the city, he saw a very large, very tall building somewhere far, which looked conspicuously like a pagoda,
Like a
with
Chinese
that sort of
pyramid. Right.
sort of roof. And I've seen pictures of it. And he asked the locals what it was, and they said up until very recently, this was still Russian territory, but Putin actually either gifted or sold this chunk of land to China, and they immediately built stuff on it. Apparently, it's like an amusement park there now. So Russia is selling land to China.
And this has been mentioned here and there, but for some reason, it's interesting because I kind of happen to agree with you. I haven't seen like the same documented evidence, like I haven't, but
Yeah.
it seems to me that a country with an exploding population, and you have this really poorly managed neighbor up north that doesn't seem
Yeah.
to do what to do with all the stuff they
Yeah.
got. It's only a matter of time.
Yeah. No, it's happening. He cannot. I mean, Putin cannot keep selling oil because it just went down in price so dramatically. So he's now selling. I mean, he's been selling the forests for quite a while to China.
Right.
I've seen some scary-looking pictures of just wasteland. What used to be the taiga, basically.
Right. How does that make you feel, though, as somebody like from Russia? Do you go, okay, well, I'm glad I'm not part of that mess?
It doesn't appeal to my inner patriot. I feel myself somewhat homeless for the most part. I mean, I feel much more at home when I go to Israel than when I do in Russia. But at the same time, if those territories, I mean, I would have no quarrels with those what they're called Kurila Islands being
Oh,
given back to Japan.
disputed territory afterward, yeah,
Yeah,
giving back
I
to
would be
Japan.
totally. Okay. I think I would be totally cool if that territory went back to Japan, for instance. But then again, I love Japan. I'm a lot more ambivalent about China. So am I objective here? Probably not. But I mean, Russia is a case of just mismanaging whatever there is to be mismanaged. It's just a huge case of mismanagement, basically, which is not surprising, and it's just the rot is at every level of government, every branch of government. Not that Russia has branches of government. It's just
Right. The
the
whole thing is
pyramid.
rotten.
Yeah.
What I'd like to then get your take on is, on one hand, you are a representative of that incredible skill set that was produced in quantities by Soviet Union and now by Russia to impress. And it works because it's very impressive. And there is a comparison to be made between the art that you have and the technical art of the First Channel, because they can just so impress you with their producing prowess that
Yeah.
even with propaganda, then it's like, wow, I'm so impressed. How do you feel that that you are also, and me to some extent, so many, are a result of this soft power that was being, we were supposed to serve the power of the state and glory of the state, promoting, as your grandparents have, and many people that you named. the musicians and artists being used by the state. Does that bother you ever? Or you just kind of go, well,
it bothers me tremendously. It's a good question. I mean, what bothers me the most is that a lot of people still in Russia, you can hear people say, your motherland gave you an education, and this is how you repay. I find this point of view completely upside down. I don't think it works like that. I mean, I owe a tremendous debt to people, certain people, very concrete people who have educated me and gave me the time of day and spent, in some cases, countless hours with me. But I think the baggage that we keep carrying, even once we leave Russia, is that we think that the relationship, at least on some level, has to be an abusive one, and it's just I hope to be the last person in the long line of people who only had such relationships, in a way. I've seen things go too much the other way in academia in the West, especially recently, when I look at it and I think, well, students probably shouldn't have that much power. Students shouldn't be able to fire professors or even like tenured professors. But in Russia, it really was tilted so heavily in favor of those with power. It wasn't healthy either. If one accepts that there were such tremendous examples of, as you said, Soviet soft power, and there were, but at the same time, how many people have really were kind of collateral damage of that system, I can start naming names, people who really should have had a career, but maybe at some point said the wrong thing, were suspected of having the wrong opinion. And or for instance, this, if I hear people saying that, Soviet Union was beneficial for Jews because look at all these Jewish musicians. I say, but if I start naming all the wonderful Jewish musicians who didn't make it at all, who weren't even allowed to leave, to pursue careers in the, it was really kind of a pyramid that was supported, but it's scary to think of how much talent was initially there. And we the West only got to see the very tip of the iceberg, in a way. So it's a very misleading picture, I think, the Soviet soft power paints. Yes, there was this tremendous incentive to succeed, almost like in the sports. My grandfather used to tell me that, in the 30s, during this, 1st of May communist demonstrations, it was not uncommon for not just on the banners, not just to see the pictures of the members of the Politburo, but also of the winners of the international competitions. Like someone could walk in the demonstration with the portrait of Oistrakh or Emil Gilels, or it was not an uncommon sight. And also, my grandfather used to tell me that when he was little, just walking in the courtyard of their house, how do you say dvornik? Well, the guy who was
backyard something.
Yeah, the guy who was tidying up the yard. That was his job. The guy's job. He would say, "Practice well, you will be like Boris Goldstein was the then sort of the big violin hope. He actually didn't amount to much, but was a great talent, back then. So people at the bottom of the social ladder, they knew the names of the musicians the way they knew the names of the sports people,
But I mean, there's some crossover. It's easier, in my opinion, to develop a school of violinists than it is to, well, not easier, but like right now it's pop stars, and then you have you have to, like, I don't know. I think that there's a lot of things there that you're pointing out, and I'm also thinking about sports and just general use of propaganda of celebrities,
yeah.
and and taking all of that in. I don't know. I guess you're pretty lucky. You've got the best parts of it. You don't live there. Do you feel like the best you can do is just do your job well, or is there something else that you feel that you owe anybody?
No, I think you described it well. It took me a while to kind of accept my own luck, because the difficulties in our profession never stop, and the times are never quite rosy. But you're right, I caught the kind of the tail end of that education system, and I got really tremendous benefits out of it. Although I must say it was really not easy, because my education in the conservatory, I was really this Maya Glizarova woman with whom I was studying. She's in our circles, she's legendary, but she was also, I wouldn't even say strict. She was insane. She was that was her life. She didn't have a family. She didn't have kids. She didn't have a partner. So imagine a Jewish woman pouring all her energies into her students, and really being never satisfied with anything ever.
But it makes you better and stronger, and
Yes, you destroy. You go out and
you destroy.
Well, yeah, I suppose if that's your goal,
That was the version of Rocky IV we didn't see, where there's a little Jewish coach who's like a little little lady.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
Yeah. It's a bit of a stereotype, but that's stereotypes appear because there are usually some sliver of truth to them.
Right, but for those people, I mean, this was the live or die kind of world. Only the very best managed to survive, and very best
Yeah.
not just playing well, but also playing the game well, and not looking outside of your craft could have been another way to protect yourself. To just focus in on that violin and your students. You don't look at politics. You don't look at anything. Just drill in.
But I mean, the downside, I mean, if you can call it that, is that people didn't really get people weren't getting much of a general education.
Yeah.
I don't know how much you remember about the school, but as long as you were proficient on your instrument, you could get away with murder.
Yes, I thought I was so hilarious, because I remember we had this 5th grade math teacher who was telling us that my class is really important, and everyone in class was like, right.
Yeah, same. That's these stories you hear, they sound ridiculous, but most of them are true. My mother, who also went to Central Music School, her physics teacher, he just got that job, and he stayed there until I arrived at the school. So he was also my physics teacher. So when he arrived, the first lesson said, "Well, guys, let me test you. Who knows what?" And nobody knew anything. People didn't know why it rained. Think the simplest stuff. And
they could play well.
Yeah, and we said, well, things are going to be different from now on. Gave everyone, failed everyone. And then, the school management had a word with him. And on the next lesson, he was already tamed, And then sometimes he would just, not give lesson at all, just show.
Granted, this was a privileged situation, but a lot of people don't, I mean,
Yeah,
in this case, we were specifically trained to be nothing but this, and everything
exactly.
else just
Exactly.
didn't matter.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean,
But
in the
it's part of
physics
our
would,
right.
would
Okay.
have been different, of course, I would presume.
Right. Buddies, it's been a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so
Same
much for
here.
your time. And well, I will make sure to place lots of good links for Boris's music, Buddy's music, because it is really can sound so beautiful. And thank you so much for sharing it with us. And
My pleasure.